Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today is part 3 of my battles in miniature focusing on Hannibal. What we're going to be looking at today is a Battle of Zama, and this is what we've got laid out before us. We have the Romans and we have the Carthaginians. However, before we get there, let's talk about what happened between the Battle of Cannae, which is one of the greatest military victories of all time, and the Battle of Zama. Hannibal had crushed Rome. He was master of Italy. And he didn't believe himself capable of taking the city of Rome. So unless Rome was crushed, Rome would never surrender. Rome would be a tenacious foe. So what he did was sought allies throughout the Italian peninsula. When he captured Italian allied troops, he would often let them go and try and curry favour with the different parts of Italy. Italy wasn't a unified country under Rome. It was Rome and various kingdoms which swore fealty to Rome at this point. So, for example, he found allies down in Capua, so he moved south. Now, after Cannae, he attempts to take the city of Nola. Over 2 years, he would have 3 major attempts to take the city and would have 3 fails. This did 2 things. It reinforced his view that Rome could not be taken by force of arms. And secondly, it boosted Roman morale after the defeats of Cannae. Now, Rome, in response to Hannibal's rampaging through Italy, would adopt the Fabian system, by which they refused big open battles and forced Hannibal to endure a war of attrition. There would be other battles, there would be other fights, but never would Rome risk in Italy defeat again on the scale of Cannae. It was called the Fabian system, named after Fabius, who came up with the policy. Now, all was not good for Rome at this time. It says there were some of the Italian city-states would ally with Hannibal. Macedonia would rise against Rome, and the fighting still continued in Spain because Hannibal had bypassed some Roman holdings to invade through the Alps, and early Carthaginian victories were abound in Spain. It didn't look good for Rome, but like I say, Rome had the resources and the stamina to maintain the battle. The longer the fight went on, the harder it became for Hannibal to conduct the war. The Macedonian revolt was put down. Hannibal's essentially neutered in Italy. Scipio Africanus goes to Spain and essentially reverses the Carthaginian wins and chases the Carthaginian army out of Spain. In fact, they tried to cross the Alps and unify with Hannibal, but the Romans caught them in northern Italy and utterly crushed them. So after 15 years, Rome is now gaining the upper hand during the war. Kind of like during the First Punic War, which I've not talked about. Early Carthaginian victories, Rome eventually had to build a navy from scratch, took the war to Carthage and won. Now, after 15 years, Scipio is about to land in Africa, so Hannibal is returned. Now, Hannibal is returned to save Carthage from Rome. Hannibal had beef, for want of a better phrase, with the ruling body of Carthage, the Council of 30 nobles. Now, they never really supported Hannibal to the degree that Hannibal needed to be supported whilst he was in Italy. Hannibal had essentially created this war of his own, and whilst they were winning, they wanted to keep costs down as much as possible. War is economic as much as it is political, and war is ruinously expensive. So if a nation doesn't have to spend on an army, they don't. So here we come to North Africa, the Battle of Zama. So we have arrayed before us the Roman army and the Carthaginian army. Hannibal would command 40,000 men and, uniquely for Hannibal, 80 elephants. Scipio would command 23,000 Italian foot and 1,500 cavalry, so he would be outnumbered. However, crucially, over 10,000 Numidians, much of which were light horse, would join him. So this wasn't the army that Hannibal had commanded in Italy, and crucially, Scipio had fought and defeated Carthaginian forces in Spain. So Scipio had an inkling over Carthaginian strengths and armies and tactics. Scipio had even used tactics like the double envelopment that Hannibal had used at Cannae in Spain at battles such as Bacula. So we now have a fight of two capable generals with two armies facing off against the other. So let's look at the armies. Let's start off with Hannibal. So we see the Hannibal's army split up into triple lines at this point. So he has his elephants at the front. He has lines of skirmishers next, and these were mixed of Gauls, Ligurians, Balearic slingers. He has some cavalry, Numidian and Carthaginian cavalry, and then he has two solid lines of infantry. The first line, well, the second line, I suppose, but of his solid infantry. These are sort of Libyan and North African infantry. Now, these hadn't fought in the Carthaginian wars. This was an army put together of mixed ability and mixed veterancy. But crucially, his final rank is his veterans. Now, this is really interesting from Hannibal. Hannibal identifies that when the Numidians join Scipio, he has a shortage of cavalry. Traditionally, that was where he was strongest and Rome was weakest, so he's able to use tactics like envelopment and flank attacks. My thoughts on Hannibal's tactics at Zama is he's going to use his army like a battering ram, smash through the Roman infantry where he has the advantage of men before the Roman advantage in cavalry controls the battlefield. So it's almost like he is playing the Romans in reverse from his earlier battles at Trebia and Cannae. Now let's look at the Roman army. So again, Rome is formed up in its traditional line as well. So we have Velites, we have Hastii, Principals, and Triarii, and Scipio at the back, and an advantage of cavalry on either flank. Now Scipio has the advantage in cavalry, but he does have to deal with the Carthaginian elephants. So he has two major tactics for this. The first one is, rather than form up his maniples like this in a traditional checkerboard formation, what he does is deploy in lines. His hope is that the elephants are drawn down the lines in the maniples, whereby they'll be able to turn on the flanks and deal with the elephants. Secondly, he puts a lot of musicians in the front ranks, and this is to create a lot of noise to scare elephants. So these elephants haven't really been used in war before, and whilst there will be an element of training and stuff, there's a big difference between training and actual combat itself. Elephants, I think, just on an aside, is a really interesting ancient warfare thing, weapon, tactic. They don't really win battles. They're used a lot in battles, and I think they have a prestige value above and beyond what their actual effects are on the battlefield. And Scipio's plan is to neuter the elephants, use his infantry to engage the Carthaginian infantry, whilst his cavalry engage on the flanks, gain dominance, and be able to fall on the Carthaginian wings of the army. So let's see how the battle starts. First off is your traditional skirmishing, but in this case, the skirmishing has the elephants coming forward. And the Roman skirmishers are scattered by the elephants. Cavalry are engaging on the wings. The Roman elephants, by all accounts, are both stampeded from the noise and pulled down the lanes between the Roman units and are neutralized. There are talk of some of the stampeding elephants being forced back through Carthaginian cavalry and skirmishing, scattering that. Potentially that did occur. However, I firmly believe that just the Roman dominance in cavalry at this point would neuter the Carthaginian cavalry on the flanks. Now, when the Carthaginian cavalry flees, the Roman cavalry chases off after it. So phase 1 of the battle, the elephants are neutered and taken off the field. Roman skirmishers have taken a bloody loss. Roman cavalry have driven off the Carthaginian cavalry, but they have off the field. So for now, it is infantry versus infantry. What we then see is the Carthaginians and the Roman skirmishers starting to engage, where the numbers of the Carthaginians will take its toll, and the Roman skirmishers are scattered. And there are losses to the Carthaginian skirmishers as well. To see that the Roman manipular formations go ahead, and the Hastii will advance and deal with the Carthaginian skirmishers. What happens at this point, though, is the Carthaginian skirmishers will flee from the front ranks, and the Carthaginian line won't let them passage. So the skirmishers are running around the flanks, and some of them will rally and join the ranks, whereas others won't. The Hastii will continue into this rank of the Carthaginian battle line and start to struggle. As we can see now, Carthage has the numbers and the advantage in the fight that's going on. We now turn to phase 2 of the battle. So the Hastii are struggling against this rank, and there is a pause in the battle. And this is where Roman tactics and control come into the mix. Scipio, seeing that the Carthaginian front rank is longer than the Roman front rank, and knowing that the Hastii are starting to tire, will send up some principals to join the line, so this line can push in. Again, there is savage fighting, and the Romans are starting to push the Carthaginians backwards now. Eventually, this line would break, and again, the third line of the Carthaginian forces won't allow these troops into the rear. So some of them will rally and form up on the flanks. Others are taken off, and I'll take off some Romans, which would be Hastii. So again, Scipio is able to pull his manipular formations together, and he now has his triarii coming up for final clash of arms. Now the third line's clash. This is Hannibal's veterans versus the Roman triarii, the best of both forces fighting. Sources say they're evenly matched with pushing and pulling until the return of the cavalry. The Roman cavalry returns. Now, why did the Numidians side with Rome? Well, the Numidian king Massinissa. Sorry, I am very poor at pronunciations, in case you haven't guessed if you've seen any of my other videos, has returned, and he's offered more power and independence under the Romans than he could ever have hoped for with the Carthaginians. Whether Rome would stick to that in the future or not, we know Rome and Rome's imperial ambitions. However, he came back, and we all know what happens when an army is attacked on its flanks and side, just like at Cannae, just like at Trebia. As this cavalry comes on the back of the Carthaginian force breaks and flees, and it is all over for Hannibal. It is all over for Carthage. In the rout, 20,000 Carthaginian troops are killed. Left on the battlefield dead is around 5,000 Romans and Numidians. I always keep saying, battles, when the battle lines are clashing, yes, there will be casualties, but there will never be the number of casualties as during the rout. Carthage has been defeated. Hannibal is to be defeated and humbled. Carthage is essentially now reduced to a city-state with limited holdings, so it could never again challenge the sovereignty of Rome and Rome's control of the Mediterranean. Carthage would eventually be crushed in the Third Punic War, which essentially was a siege of Carthage itself. Hannibal would go into exile in the east, eventually work with the Seleucids, and he would never really command armies again for the Seleucids. I think he would be in charge of sort of organising troops, pulling troops together, and the navies. I think he was more of a prestige hire for the Seleucid Empire. Now, famously, to leave with an anecdote, famously when meeting Scipio, Scipio wanted Hannibal to admit that Scipio was the better general. So Scipio asked who was the greatest general of the ancient world. Why? Responded Hannibal. Alexander the Great was the greatest. Now Scipio had asked after Alexander who was next. Now Scipio was expecting Hannibal to say himself, Scipio Africanus. And Hannibal replied, Pyrrhus. So Pyrrhus was a Greek general. I think he was part of the successors who had invaded Rome and invaded Italy and fought Rome, won most of his battles against Rome, but the battles were so costly, it's where we get the phrase Pyrrhic victory from. Then Hannibal was asked, if I hadn't defeated you, then Hannibal, where would you have placed yourself? And Hannibal replied, if I had defeated you, Scipio Africanus, then I will put myself above Alexander. I would have been the greatest general. And that's where we leave it. Hannibal has been bested by Scipio. Carthage is utterly destroyed. Hannibal's last battle feels like he was using Roman tactics against the Roman army, which was using essentially Carthaginian tactics. The elephants have been utterly neutered. Again, they're seen as a wonder weapon in war. I've not seen many battles where they had much of an impact, and Rome would become Pax Romana and command the Mediterranean. If you've got any thoughts on the battle or Hannibal's career as a general, do share them. He's one of my favourite generals. I also have a soft spot for Scipio Africanus as well. And I look forward to chatting to you in future. There is some more miniatures, history in miniature battles coming up from an unexpected period. So do subscribe if you want to see more of this, and I'll catch you later. Goodbye.